Hi there, I'm Mercedes Pfab, here at the Captured on Canvas studio, ready to do our very first paint tutorial with Picture This. And today we are going to do a garden scene looking through a keyhole. First, we'll make sure that we have all of our supplies. First of all, on our easel, we should have our blank 16 by 20 canvas. That is going to be our masterpiece. We should have our paint palette with these following colors. We should have a lot of white, some primary blue, yellow, oxide green, black, brown, gold, and red. We should have our large flat brush for large areas. We should have another flat square tip brush, and this one's going to have stiffer bristles for different textures. We should also have our medium square tip brush, and last but not least, our really tiny brush for tiny detail. We should also have a cup of water and a paper towel for cleaning our brushes as we go. So anytime I start with a painting, I always build it up with layers. So we're going to start with the background and paint the closest thing last. That being said, we're going to go ahead and start with a nice soft blue and white colored sky in the background. I'm going to use my large square tip brush, and I'm going to start with a big scoop of white to mix that nice sky blue color. So we want a big old scoop there, and I'm going to take a little bit of this blue on the corner of my brush and mix that in. Try to keep a nice little pile and keep adding until you get the desired color. All right. So once you get your color, I'm going to go ahead and just take it to the canvas here. I'm going to start about a third the way down because I already know where my keyhole is going to be, nice and big, centered in the canvas. So I'm going to start with long brush strokes, flicking left and right. Just going to start a couple inches down here. Take this down to about a third the way, making a nice even coat, spreading out those thick globs. All right, so I got the blue in, so I'm going to go ahead and clean my brush because I want a soft transition from that blue down to the white part of my sky. So I'm going to take some white, start right underneath my blue, long brush strokes, back and forth to get that nice blend between the two colors. So now we have a nice blue sky. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush again. Just gently stir it in your cup of water. Wipe it on the paper towel to get rid of any extra water. So next we're going to start with the ground. Once again, I'm going to do a nice soft green ground. So I'm going to take a big scoop of white, maybe at least the size of a quarter here, and I'm going to take a big old scoop of green. Mix that in until I get the desired color. All right, now I always like a lime green, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of yellow. Warm up that color. Add a little bit to darken it up here. Okay, so with this color, I'm going to go ahead and start with the ground. I'm going to go about halfway up on my canvas. Just start flicking back and forth. And I'm going to take this color all the way down. So once again, just kind of feathering off to the left and right because I know my keyhole is going to be there. I'm going to continue that down until I'm really close to the bottom. All right. So now we got a good start on our background. Now I'm going to go ahead and let this dry before I start painting happy trees. Now that it is dried, we're going to go ahead and start building up some trees in the background. We are going to use what I like to call the Bad Hair Day brush with those stiff bristles to add the texture in for the trees. First, I'm going to mix a dark green. So I'm going to take some of that green off to the side again, and I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of black to darken it up. Kind of going for a dark navy green or army green. I'm going to wipe off some of that extra off of my brush. We just want a good amount on there. We don't want to have too much, but we don't want to have too little either. So I'm going to start down here, kind of in the middle where I want some maybe bushes back in the background. And I'm just going to dabble my brush, kind of making it rigid across the top of where I'm going to have the top of those bushes. I'm going to color it all the way down to the top of where my grass is. And I'm going to bring it up here. Maybe I have a big tree over on the left here. Kind of coming up, framing that left side of our sky. I'm going to let some of that blue sky show up behind there too, shining through the leaves. Maybe add another tree over here on the right. Just a dabble, dabble, dabble. Maybe have some little branches leaning over here. Kind of have some leaves sticking out here and there. You can even use the corner of your brush to add some little splotches there, here and there. Okay, so now we got a good start on our trees. We're going to go ahead and clean off our brush. Once again, gently stir it in the bottom of that cup. Wipe it on the side, squeeze out that paint, and then wipe it on your paper towel. All right, so now that green that I used before on the grass, I'm going to bring that back in throughout my trees to create that depth. So we're going to use a little bit of that light green. Once again, doing exactly the same thing you just did with that dark green. And we're just going to add a little bit here and there for some of those closer branches, just little clusters. Some to the little bushes in the bottom, kind of focusing more up at the top where the light source would be. And fill it out to the edge as well, a little bit here and there. All right, so now we got a good start on our trees. Let's go ahead and clean off our brush. So next we're gonna go ahead and just let that dry for a few minutes. And we are going to kind of jump down here. I kind of want to have this little cobblestone path that's gonna lead right up to our gate. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the small square tip brush, or the middle-sized. With this brush, you're just gonna wanna hold it horizontally. But I'll show you that here in a second. We're gonna go ahead and mix like a medium to light gray. I'm gonna take a couple big old scoops, again, separate that somewhere on our palette, and I'm going to add a little bit of black to make that gray. All right, so that color about right there. So I'm gonna hold my brush horizontally. It's basically going to be little scribbles, and they're gonna be like a puzzle piece together. So I'm going to start maybe about 2/3 of the way up on my ground here. I'm just going to make this little zigzag to make my first stone. I'm going to go right next to it, make another one, leaving just a little bit of space in between. Making them different sizes, different shapes. And as I come down, I'm going to make them a little bit bigger. Once again, fit in them like puzzle. A little bit bigger again. So each row I just make it a little bit bigger. So as it comes closer with perspective, it's going to appear much larger, and items further away are going to appear much smaller. So the gap between might get a little bigger as well. Don't be afraid to leave the edges rigid. Stones are never perfect. I'm kind of following this line here on the left and the right. Once again, it's kind of a rigid line. But at least now we can see that path going up the left and the right. Maybe just a couple more here in the front. This is always a good time to take a step back and look at the canvas as a whole. Make sure they're all evenly spaced, you're not missing a spot. But I'm going to bring it down just about this far, because once again, I know that I want to have my keyhole covering up that bottom area. So now I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush. All right, so the next part, we're going to go back to our trees. We have to add those little happy branches. So we're going to continue using that middle-sized square tip brush. And I'm just going to simply use a little bit of black, very light pressure, and I'm going to use the thin side of my brush. So if I'm going up, I want to hold my brush standing up, and if I'm going at a curve, I want to lead with that thin side. So I may just have to rotate it in my hand. But I'm just going to add a couple little branches throughout the trees, just here and there. We don't have to add the whole branches. Just make it look like it's behind the leaves there. Use very light pressure with this step. The lighter pressure you have, the smaller those lines are going to be. The more you press, the larger the lines are going to be. Very light. And the less you think about it, the more natural it can look. Quick movements also help make those nice smooth lines. Sometimes when we're going very slow, we get those little shakes showing through more so. So let's add maybe one more up here. It doesn't need to be much. All right, now we'll go ahead and clean off our brush. All right, so we're gonna let this dry because the next part we're gonna add a white gate in, and we don't want to do it now because we'll have a green gate. So right now we'll just take a little break. Welcome back to Picture This. Next we're gonna go ahead and start with our white bridge. We're going to take our paint palette and we are going to use our middle-sized square tip brush. We're going to let the width of this brush actually do the work for us so we don't have to draw it out. We're going to use a little bit of white, and I'm just going to hold my brush horizontally so when I go up and down, it's going to make those nice wide stripes for each plank on the fence. So I'm going to start with on the left side and the right side of my path for each post. I'm going to come up here somewhere in those greens, creating that overlap between the layers. And I want these to be the same height. Once again, you kind of want to move fast, helps make those lines a little bit more smooth. Now I'm going to jump to the middle of my gate. I know that I want to have this nice little arch. So the top of the middle of the arch, I want to be the same height as my post. So I'm just going to start with one, going straight up, maybe just a little bit to the left. And I'm going to come right down to the top of my path. Go just to the right, spacing them out just a little bit for the opening. And now when I go out to the left and the right, I'm going to make each one just a little bit shorter. Taking it down. Once again, you don't have to push very hard on your brush. Nice light pressure. Sometimes I drag my pinky on there if the paint's wet or dry so that I can help guide those straight lines. Bring it down each time, check in as you go. Does it match your other side? Looks like we just got it to fit. And now I'm just going to continue that fence to the left and the right. pretty much copying this height right here, just on the right side of the post, coming down right to the ground. And I'm just going to continue that, checking that your spacing is the same as you go. Sometimes as you work out, the spacing can change, so you want to make sure that you're consistent. Go about that far. To the left side here. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and connect this fence so there are not a bunch of floating lines. We're going to go ahead and rotate our brush 90 degrees, and now we're going to go left and right to create the lines that go all the way across. So we have two, one at the top, and one just near the bottom. Goes all the way across. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and clean my brush. I'm just going to gently stir it in my cup of water again. Make sure you get all of that color out of there. Wipe it on my paper towel. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my large square tip brush and start with drawing that keyhole. I'm going to have it kind of like a rusty old keyhole, so I'm going to use a little bit of this brown. It's burnt umber. Just a little bit. You can use the fat side or the thin side of your brush. I'm going to start with just a couple dots. It's always kind of nice to map it out, like I connect the dots. I'm going to start just a few inches down from the top and center, because I know I will want it centered. Start with one mark right up here. And I'm going to go straight down and make a mark maybe a couple inches up from the bottom. So I know that's where I want the bottom of my keyhole. Then I'm going to make a mark about halfway up, maybe just in about a third from the right, third from the left. This is going to be right underneath the round part of the keyhole before it gets to the bottom. So from here, I'm going to connect the dots. So from this left dot, I'm going to round it up and around to the top. And then I'm going to continue that same curve down and to the left. So now we should have pretty much a circle. So down here at this left dot, I'm going to angle out just a little bit. Stop once I see I'm level with this mark. Draw my straight line over and kind of mirror that same length to the left side. And then I'm going to connect with one more straight line from this corner down to the right. We can always bring it in a little bit. So if you're unsure, make it bigger than you think you want it to be so that you can always bring it in. So I'm going to just kind of go back and make this a fatter brush stroke. All the way around. Just so then it's easier to color around the outside. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start coloring the outside of my keyhole, and I want it to be rustic, so I'm actually going to use a combination of 3 colors. I'm going to use a lot of white, some of that brown we just used, and a little bit of gold. We do not need to clean our brush in between. I'm just going to blend the colors throughout, giving it that rusty, streaky colors. So I'm going to start with our brown, just like as we were, but I want all of my brush strokes to be up and down. So I'm just going to add kind of a little stripe here. Once again, stopping once it gets toward that edge of the keyhole. And occasionally I'm going to dip into my white and blend right next to the chocolate and keep blending. It's just kind of like in the beginning with the sky. The more and more you go over it, the more and more it gets blended. You can't really overblend this part. And occasionally I'm going to add this gold. It's actually an iridescent paint. Gives it kind of that metallic metal look. So I'm going to add that here and there. And I'm also going to continue the image around the sides of my canvas. It definitely makes it look more complete. But some artists prefer not to, so it's up to you. Now we're just going to shorten our brush strokes here, still keeping them vertical, to go across the top. Once again, occasionally dipping into the white, the brown, and the gold. And you can continue that. You You can continue that over the top of the canvas. Now I'm definitely using a lot more of this dark brown here, this burnt umber, just because I want it to be a little darker of a background. But you can always add a lot more white to brighten it up. If you want more of that iridescent, you can always add more of that as well. Just play with it. Don't forget about that top. It's happened a lot where I forget about one side. Be the one thing you look at when it's all complete, I promise. So make sure you check those sides as you go. Makes it a lot easier, especially if you got any mixed colors. Makes it a lot easier to match. And you're gonna focus on that other side there. Don't forget about him. And even with the bottom, you want to continue that bottom edge as well. You can always do it right after the whole painting's done, or you can do it as you go. I'm going to finish it by connecting across the bottom. It can be hard. You can always go up or down, whatever's easiest. All right, once you feel like you like it, go ahead and clean off your brush. We'll take another little break. Welcome back to Picture This. We're working on finalizing our details around the keyhole. I'm going to go back to using that medium square tip brush and grabbing my palette here. I'm going to use just black. I'm going to work on just outlining it, kind of separating it from the background. I like to use this brush with outlining because it tends to hold more paint. You can always use a smaller round tip brush if that's what you're more comfortable with, but this one is my preference. So with a little bit of black on here, we don't want it too much on there, but just enough to cover the end. I'm going to just simply use the thin side of my brush just like we did those little branches in our trees. I'm going to start with just outlining around the keyhole. Once again, if you move a little quicker, sometimes that line can go a little smoother. You want that nice light pressure. And at any time you can stop and get more paint on your brush. And remember to breathe. I always catch myself holding my breath here. Move on the exhale is what I always say. All right, so once we got that outlined, I always like to add little painterly lines just to kind of hide any imperfection that you may have with your outlining. Just really light pressure, just adding these little black squiggly lines kind of frames it in, brings your focus in towards that center here. Again, really light pressure, almost just little scribbles. Kind of makes it look like we're looking at the whole plate. Keyholes on. And with the black, I'm going to continue. I want to add some vines that go up the left and the right here. So really light pressure. These can be a little tricky with this square brush, so you'll have to rotate your brush in your hand. If not, go to that small round tip. Definitely makes it easier. Just going to add a couple spirals here that go maybe about halfway up, or just a little bit over. I'm going to do that to both sides. Once again, kind of check in. Are you consistent on spacing, how big they are? You can always add a couple little swiggly lines in there, like little vines. Kind of framing off those bottom corners there. Maybe they go up a little bit higher. All right, so now we're going to use a really tiny round tip brush. This is going to be really nice for really little detail. So I'm going to use a little bit of black, and I'm going to add the little hardware on my gate, making those little hinges and the handles. Really light pressure. I'm just going to draw these little hinges, kind of like long sideways triangles here that come out into the gate from those side posts. I'm going to put those right where those crossboards are. One down here. And next we have our little handles. I always like to think of it as two little parentheses, just kind of smiling back and forth. So from the two middle posts, I'm going to just make that little curve out to the left, out to the right. We are going to move to that middle-sized square tip brush again, and we're going to go ahead and add some greens around our vines, like little leaves, and we can add some little grass to add some texture down there in the bottom. So I'm going to use this brush with that oxide green again. I'm going to have it just a little bit darker than I did my grass green, so I'm just going to take a little bit more of this oxide green, mix it right over top of my grass green. And maybe if you wanted more lime green, just add a little bit of yellow. Warms it up a little bit. And there's a couple different ways you can do leaves. You could always think of them as footballs or more of like a teardrop. So I'm going to show kind of both ways. Sometimes I like to start with just a simple circle. I like to start from the center and spiral out. And to make it that teardrop, all you do is add this little curved triangle that comes down to the left and the right of that circle, just like that. Color it in. Or you can always do little football leaves or a combination of both. Just those two parentheses for the left and the right, and color it in. I'm going to just add a few on each side. And a little tip coming down. And I'm going to continue with this color, and I'm going to add some little blades of grass that kind of peek through the stones of the path as well as the post of the fence. Just very light pressure, holding it standing up. Just going to add a couple, maybe there, maybe at the bottom of this post. Really, really light pressure. It's almost like you're pulling your brush up and away from the canvas. I'm going to continue on to add some highlights so they're not so flat. I'm going to go back to maybe having a little bit of that lighter green, so maybe you just add a little bit of white to the color you just had for your leaves. And we're just going to do one little swipe on one side of each of the leaves. I always like to choose the side that the light source is coming from, so you want it to be consistent throughout. Since I'm assuming it's kind of coming through the keyhole, I'm going to do it on the left side of the right leaves and the right side of the left leaves. It's just a quick little swipe. Very light pressure again. It doesn't need to be right at the edge of the leaf, but just a little bit in. I think one little final touch for the painting here would be to add little flowers. Gives it a little bit of color. I'm going to go ahead and make kind of a middle pink color. I'm going to go ahead and start with some white again, just a little bit. Add a little bit of red. Mix that in. So with this, I'm going to be using my brush standing up again, making them like little tulips. It's kind of like a little V. So maybe at the top of one of these little grass, I'm just going to make a little V and maybe one little point right in the middle. And just add a few, just to add a little bit of color. And maybe one more up here. All right, so then you can go ahead and clean off your brush. There is one final step before we are done with our painting, and it's always to sign it. So I usually sign it down here in the lower corner. You can use a brush of your choice. Usually the smallest one is the best option. Just pick a color that's gonna pop and sign away. Thank you for joining me, Mercedes Pfab, a Captured on Canvas for Picture This.